Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ryan Arori. I'm the Senior Advisor for Budget and Finance here at OSSE. I'm going to be sharing with you a few slides on the fiscal year 2022 Public Charter School Reopening Facilities Grant. And just before I get started on the slides, I just want to let everyone know that this presentation is being recorded, and the recording and a copy of the slides will be made available on OSSE's website this week. If you have any questions, you can do so via the questions feature, or I think you should be able to also do it via the chat feature. So I'll monitor both so that if you have any questions throughout the presentation, I will be happy to answer them for you. So I am going to jump right in and move on to our agenda. So we're first going to start out with some of the details for this grant. Then we will get into the allowable expenses, followed by a review of the application and how we are going to evaluate the application, and then close it out with the important dates and contact information. And then I will also open it up for a Q&A at the end of the session. So the goals for today's presentation, at the end of the presentation, the attendees will understand the purpose of the Public Charter School Reopening Facilities Grant. You'll be prepared to complete and submit an application for this grant, and you will understand the basics of project budgeting and allowable expenses. So we're going to start out with the details for this grant. And for allocations, there were allocations awarded to every public charter school LEA that is in operation for the 21-22 school year. And these allocations were published on the OSSE website in the grants and funding section. They've been updated a couple times since they were first released, which was I believe in July. But the most recent allocations are on the website. And this is a formula grant that is a total of $10 million. And the formula awards a little less than $82,000 to each charter LEA for each facility that is in operation for the 21-22 school year. So if your LEA has one facility, then you would be awarded $81,967.21. If you had two facilities, then you would get double that amount, and so on and so forth, depending on the number of facilities that your LEA has in operation for the school year. The facilities data that we used to determine the number of facilities in operation at each charter LEA is located on the DME website. So basically the way the formula, as I said, the formula is an award is made for each facility. So if more than one LEA is co-located in one facility, all of the LEAs that are in that facility will each receive the base award amount for operating within that facility. And if there is a single LEA that has multiple schools in one facility, the LEA will receive one base award amount for that facility. So again, you can go to the OSSE website to the grants and funding section. There is the preliminary allocation document there, and it lists all of the facilities that were used to make those calculations and those awards for each LEA. And if you have any questions about that, you can certainly reach out to me. The application for this grant is now available on EGMS. It was opened on October 27th. And if I move to the next slide, you'll see that the submission deadline for this grant application will be 3 p.m. on Wednesday, December 1st, 2021. So we gave you about 5 weeks to complete the application for this grant. So very importantly, the award period for this grant is from May 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. So usually we release grants that are aligned to like the OSSE fiscal year, but in this case, we have extended the allowable expenses period from May of this year until June of next year. And the reason that we did this is because this is a grant where all of the allowable expenses are facilities related, and for the reopening of schools for in-person learning for the 21-22 school year. So we wanted to make sure that if there was any facilities related expenses that were incurred starting in May, that we wanted to allow you to be able to submit those expenditures, those facilities related expenditures to us, even if it was before the grant application period was started. So the funding for this grant is from the Department of the Treasury. I know usually most grants are from the Department of Education, but that is not the case for this grant. This grant was awarded by the Department of Treasury, more specifically 31 CFR Part 35, which is the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. So I'm going to first go into the allowable expenses for this grant. And the purpose of the grant is to provide charter LEAs with funds for facilities-related expenses that address or mitigate the public health impacts coronavirus has had on LEA's ability to provide in-person instruction for the 21-22 school year. So the allowable expenses include costs that meet the purpose of the funding. So essentially what that means is that the expenditures must align with the stated purpose of the grant. And what we're going to be looking for when we review your grant applications is checking to make sure that the costs are first, facilities related, and second, that they address or mitigate the public health impacts of COVID-19. And I'll go into some examples on the next few slides. Costs, since this is a federal grant, costs must meet the requirements of the permissible use of federal funds, which is located within 2 CFR Part 200. And for non-allowable expenses, we're not going to allow unallowable costs per federal government guidelines. We won't allow costs that do not meet the purpose of the grant, and we won't allow indirect costs. One thing that I do want to mention here is that since this is not federal funding that's provided by the Department of Education, so usually in other grants like Edgar 34 Part 75 and 76 would apply for this, but for this grant, since it's not a Department of Education grant, those Edgar rules do not apply for this grant. Moving on to the next slide. So these are just some examples of what allowable expenses may include. The first bullet point is additional facility staff that are required for mitigating health impacts of COVID-19. And what I mean by additional facility staff is if there's any new staff that were hired to address any of the public health impacts of COVID-19. So if you needed to hire an additional janitor or facilities maintenance staff or something like that, then if they were hired because of COVID-19, then we would consider that an allowable expense. If you have like current facilities staff that you've had employed for a number of years, that would not count because these people were not hired to mitigate the health impacts of COVID-19. Second is maintenance, upgrades, and other professional services required to safely reopen school to in-person learning. So if there's any like additional maintenance, additional upgrades, additional professional services that were contracted or paid out because of the safe reopening of school for the 21-22 school year, then those would be allowable expenses. Next is furniture, fixtures, and equipment that allow for social distancing and compliance with public health guidelines. So an example of this would be a lot of schools are doing outdoor classrooms, like the furniture, fixtures, and equipment that are required to do an outdoor classroom. Those would all be allowable expenses under this grant. Next is enhanced cleaning services. So this means like the additional cleaning services that are required to mitigate health impacts of COVID-19. So what I'm trying to get here again is if you have like a janitorial contract for each year, we would accept as an allowable expense like the additional cost of that janitorial contract because of the enhanced cleaning services that are required to mitigate the health impacts of COVID-19. The next example is HVAC system upgrades. So again, if any upgrades were needed to be made to the HVAC system because of the health impacts of COVID-19, then that would be an allowable expense. And then construction projects related to social distancing. So again, outdoor classrooms, building additional classrooms, all of those would be considered allowable expenses for this grant. And I'm sure that there will be a lot of questions about additional allowable expenses. This list is not everything. So certainly if you have any additional questions or have any expenses that you would like to know about if they would be allowable, you can certainly ask right now via the questions feature or the chat feature, or you can email me and I'll have my contact information later on in the presentation. So in terms of the application, we set this up to be a very easy lift for you all to fill out, which I'll go into. But all applications must be submitted through EGMS. Again, the deadline for the application submission is 3 p.m. on Wednesday, December 1st, 2021. We highly encourage you to submit your applications early to avoid any errors or anything, and so you have time to correct those. And as you're going through the application process, please contact me if you have any questions or if you need any assistance. So the main application screen will look like a lot of the grants that you have applied for on EGMS. So I encourage you to read all the content and assurances carefully. Please, there's one question that you'll need to respond to in the program narrative section, which I'll get into on the next slide, but please respond to that question. Please complete the contact information for your LEA. Enter all of your detailed planning expenditures, sign off on the assurances, and then submit your application. So in the program narrative section, we are asking just one question that you'll need to fill out, and I'll just read it right now. The question is, briefly describe the public health impacts that COVID-19 has had on your LEA's ability to provide in-person instruction, and how the facility grant funding will be used to address these impacts. So what we're looking for in this section is just additional information that will help OSSE and the grant reviewers to inform the budget that you provide, that you enter into the detailed planning expenditure section. And I'm not looking for a whole essay on this. I want to make it easy for you, so it would generally be like one paragraph that you would respond to in this section. I'm going to move ahead a couple tabs since most of the other ones are pretty standard. But for the budget, we're asking you to complete your planned budget expenditures for the entire award period. And these include 5 categories: salaries and benefits, professional services, equipment, supplies and materials, and fixed property costs. And these are standard categories that we have included in a number of other grants. So on the detailed planning expenditures tab, what we're looking for here is enough detail to determine that the expenditures that you are outlining are allowable, reasonable, and allocable. So each row should give enough detail to clearly link to allowable uses. So some examples here. We would like to know the number of items that plan to be purchased, i.e. if you're purchasing 100 desks to support social distancing, like we would want to know how many desks are purchased in that line item. Or another example is 10 air purifiers. We'd like to know the number of air purifiers that you're using to inform that line item. The length of time or frequency of a professional service. So if you're doing weekly cleanings, we would want to know that information. And then if you're doing staff salaries, we would want to know the time frame the staff are being paid out of the public charter school reopening facility grant funds. As an example here, 10% of salaries from October 1st to June 30th. We just want to know the level. We basically want to know all of the assumptions that are going into how you got to that budgeted total for any of the line items that you're including in the grant. And then more importantly, in the description for any of the items that are budgeted, we need to know how it is facilities related and how it addresses or mitigates the public health impacts of COVID-19. So again, as an example, we purchased 100 desks to maximize social distancing, or we purchased additional cleaning services that are required to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. Or the last one, we're doing the construction of outdoor classrooms to improve social distancing. So again, we just need to be able to check the box to make sure that the expenditures that are outlined in the grant application are facilities related and that they address or mitigate the public health impacts of COVID-19. So in terms of application submission, please avoid technical issues by submitting early, and alert your program contact, which is me, as soon as possible if you are experiencing any issues. And then as you're going through the grant application, please make sure that you save all pages as you go. Please review each tab to ensure completeness. Please run the consistency check to lock the application, and please then submit the application to OSSE. Most importantly, the submit button will be unavailable after 3 p.m. on December 1st, 2021. So please make sure that you hit that submit button before 3 p.m. Just some other details in the application history tab. That is available to see all the actions involved in the application. And then there's also an application print feature that's available if you need a hard copy of the application. And just please note that EGMS generates PDFs only once per hour. Really quick for the evaluation of the applications. This is a formula application, so all of the dollar amounts that are preloaded into the application is the award that is made to your LEA. So this is not a competitive grant application where we're going to have like grant reviewers judge your application against any others. This is a formula grant, so the amount that you see there is the amount that is awarded to you and the amount that you can budget for. And in terms of OSSE's internal review of the application, reviewers will determine whether enough detail is provided to ensure that the expenditures are reasonable, necessary, and appropriate. And if revisions are needed, you will be given an opportunity to make the necessary changes in order for OSSE to approve the application. And again, what I'm going to be, I'm one of the grant reviewers for this application. So again, I'm just going to be looking through your detailed planning expenditures to make sure that they are facilities related and that they're related to mitigating the effects of COVID-19. Those are the two big things that I'm looking for in each one. So if I can't tell that it is a facilities related expense or that it's related to COVID-19, I'm going to send it back and ask that you redo your submission to point out that it does check both of those boxes. So that's very important. There's just a couple more slides, and then I see there's a couple questions in the chat, and then I'll jump to those. So the important dates, again, I'm going to say it again because it's so important. The deadline is 3 p.m. on Wednesday, December 1st, 2021. Please do not miss that deadline. 3 p.m. Wednesday, December 1st, 2021. And then, as I mentioned before, the award period for this grant goes back to May 1st, 2021 as the start, and the last date for allowable expenditures is June 30th of 2022. The contact information, that's me, Ryan Arori, and I am the one that monitors the OSSE.charter reopen at dc.gov email address. I'm happy to take any questions that you have regarding this grant or any issues that you're having with EGMS, but there also is an EGMS help desk if you're having any technical issues with the website, and that's OSSE.callcenter@dc.gov or the phone number 202-719-6500. So that wraps up the entire presentation. I tried to keep it short and sweet for everybody. I do see some questions in the chat, so I am going to look at those. So I see a question here. Sorry, just bear with me one sec because this is kind of a hard software platform to navigate. We hired additional food service staff in order to be able to serve students in their classrooms. Would that be an acceptable expense? So I think I might need a little more detail on this one, but in my eyes, additional food service staff is not a facilities related expense, so would not be considered as an allowable expense for this grant. But again, if you have any additional information about that and include it in the grant application, or if you want to email me or discuss specifics, I'm happy to talk about that with you. Sorry, this is a very weird GoToWebinar platform. The question is, can we request all costs related to janitorial services? The answer to this one is no, because janitorial services is a typical expense that we would expect a school to have any school year that the school is operating. But janitorial services are allowable if there are additional janitorial service costs that are incurred by the LEA that are specifically related to COVID-19. There is a question, sorry I joined late, but do these funds replace SOAR facilities funds for this year? That is a good question. I do not manage the SOAR facilities grant, but I believe that there is not a SOAR facilities grant this year. This grant is not intended to replace that grant per se, because this grant is specifically related to mitigating the public health impacts of COVID-19, but there are expenditures that are allowable under this grant that I think would probably be allowable under a SOAR facilities grant. So I hope that answered your question, but let me know if you have any additional follow-up questions for that. Another good question, if your school is new, how can we demonstrate additional expenses if we did not have these staff members last school year? For instance, regarding maintenance staff, how can we demonstrate that we hired additional staff? This is a great question. So what we would be looking for is, for a new facility staff, like how much time the staff is, how much time the staff member is participating in projects that relate to mitigating the effects of COVID-19. And I guess this also goes for all existing LEAs too. We would allow probably like 10% of an existing staff member's time that is like a facilities related staff member to be applied to this grant if they are doing something that is related to mitigating the effects of COVID-19. And sorry, I keep coming back to that phrase because that is like this specific language that is in the funding from the Department of Treasury that we're allocating for this grant. So as long as you provide enough description in the grant application for how much time they're spending on activities that are related to mitigating the effects of COVID-19, then that gives us enough information to be able to determine if it's an allowable expense or not. So yeah, again, you can email me if you have any additional questions about that. Moving on to the next question. As part of the ESSER funds, we had to complete a facilities concept proposal form, and since it was deemed construction and our lease was less than 50 years, we couldn't move forward with it at all. Is that same restriction on these funds? So the answer to that is no, that restriction does not apply to these funds. The way that I understand it is that because ESSER funds were provided by the Department of Education, there are specific rules, which I believe are those Edgar rules that I had mentioned, Edgar 34, parts 75 and 76. Those are Department of Education specific, and those do not apply to this grant because this grant is funded by the Department of the Treasury, which is 31 CFR part 35. And those requirements for like a concept proposal and all of that lease information, not required for this grant. However, this grant still is under the 2 CFR part 200. So any expenditures would need to be meet those requirements of 2 CFR part 200. The next question, do you want us to spend the 90K on each facility, or can we use the funds collectively? So the formula allocates the money based on the number of facilities, but the award is made to the LEA. So it is up to the LEA, it is up to your discretion as to how that money gets spent. Again, as long as they meet the two allowability requirements, which is facilities related and for mitigating the effects of COVID-19, we are not looking specifically to make sure that the money is spent on each of the individual facilities for which your LEA might have been awarded funding. Okay, thanks. I think that I got all of the questions. Again, I am going to just go back to the contact information. If you have any additional questions, OSSE.charterreopen@dc.gov is the email address that I'm monitoring for this grant. And if you have any questions related to EGMS and technical stuff, it is OSSE.callcenter@dc.gov. I see another question just came in. Will you be sending the recording and slide deck around to registrants? Yes, the deck, this webinar has been recorded. And once I get that file up on the website and a copy of this deck on the website, then I'll email that out to every registrant, but then I'll also email that out to every single LEA grant manager. So with that, I will hang around for another minute or so to see if any additional questions come in, but that is the end of my presentation. So thank you so much for attending.